Double Primer is back-to-back conversations with someone passionate about their work and passionate about someone else's work. Mostly art and mostly Atlanta. I'm your host, Sean Mills.
Welcome to Double Primer, episode 30 for January 23rd, 2019. I'm your host, Sean, joined by Tanju. So Tanju, what's trending for you this week?
All right. So I think I'm going to change it up a little bit. Rather than saying what's trending on my Twitter, top trending, which I guess everyone probably has access to in general, I'm just going to talk about something that's kind of trending within my feed that I actually heard on NPR Fresh Air with Terry Gross yesterday. And then today I went back and actually listened to it in more detail because I wasn't able to listen to the whole thing in my car. But it's about an author named Jason Rezaian. I can't pronounce his name correctly, but he was a reporter or bureau chief of for the Washington Post in Tehran, Iran, and was arrested in solitary confinement by the Iranian government for 3 years, and just wrote a book about it. He was released a couple years ago, and it was a pretty impressive little interview they got going on there. So today, actually, I found it on Twitter where they said that the notes, the show had actually been released, so you can listen to it now, listen to the stream or listen to it as a podcast. But the thing that was really interesting was he talked a little bit about kind of the weird, surreal nature of Iranian. They thought he was a spy. So he was arrested for being accused of being a spy for the U.S. government because he was an author. And there's a couple of things that kind of really struck me, which was like, apparently some of the evidence they had against him was like he said it was a casual email with a friend where he mentioned the words, I've been maintaining radio silence, like as a phrase. But the Iranians were like, this only spies use language like that, right? And I actually haven't heard the whole episode, so I want to go back and listen to it. But then there was another little quip about how they thought he had some covert operation with like code words because he's talking about Kickstarter, and he lived in Tehran for a while before he got arrested. So he had toyed with this idea of starting a Kickstarter to bring in avocados to Iran, because apparently there's no avocados in Iran. And the Iranian government apparently thought that was some covert thing, right? And they were joking on, they were like, no, he's really just trying to bring guacamole to the Iranian people, right? So that was pretty awesome, and whatever. And kind of went down the little Twitter hole of trying to chase that down a little bit. So I'll put some notes out, the show notes on this. Definitely encourage people to, at a minimum, listen to that interview and maybe even check out his book. I'm pretty interested in checking out his book now.
Yeah, I guess if you're paranoid, avocado could seem like a grenade size-wise.
Just deliciousness could potentially be, oh God, I may have to cut this. I can't even think of the right word, but subversive, right? When you're reading it with delicious, exotic food from somewhere else, kind of opens up your world.
Well, another thing that's kind of trending in our world right now is that in Atlanta, big thing that's happening is the Super Bowl. The 53rd Super Bowl is coming to town, right?
Yes.
And so that kind of made me think about the story that always comes on around this time of year, which is there's this kind of apocryphal story that Lamar Hunt, the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs, came up with the name Super Bowl. And so, like, this is like an oft-repeated story. And part of that story is that the idea was that his wife and kids maybe contributed because they were playing with a super ball, a big rubber ball. And he was like, let's just call it the Super Bowl. And so, like, that's become, like, the myth. And then this
long ago, like, I don't even know when was the first Super. I guess 53 years ago was the first Super Bowl.
Well, yeah, okay, so like here, that's where it gets tricky, is because according to this reporter Henry Feder of the Atlantic, he kind of uncovers it and says, well, the math doesn't add up because they were already calling it the Super Bowl before he claims he invented it. A, and then B, like, the term bowl was already a term used for like college, so you'd say like the bowl season.
That's exactly what my question was going to be. Like, where?
And then super is just like, it's you use that to say the biggest. So like So it's kind of crazy that like this guy was like going to take credit for calling something Super Bowl, where it's basically like a name that already like it's
like something
default.
Like goofy old uncle, like,
right.
claims It's claimed as some meme or joke.
Mm-hmm. But then on that wavelength, it kind of made me think about it. When I was in art school, I had a teacher tell me all artworks have two names. One is the name the artist gives it, and the second is the name that people call it. So, like, the part of what makes the Super Bowl is that it's like, that's what you have to call it. It's the biggest bowl, right?
Right.
And so, like, no matter who, like, first writes a name down, it's like whatever sticks. And
Sure.
and that's true for people, too, that it's like, if you have a long name, people inevitably shorten it. There's nicknames and everything else. So, has that ever come up for you with making, like, naming things? Has that ever been sticky for you?
Not for making so much, but I will say, totally going off on a tangent here for a moment, I'll return to this question. But on a tangent, I am really disappointed in myself in that last year in the fall, I got to thinking like, ooh, I got to make some stuff for the Super Bowl so I can capitalize on it and like sell like tchotchkes, right, for like Super Bowl parties, like whatever, little lights or chip bowls or whatever, right, a breadboard. And now that it's upon us, I've got nothing, right? I'm not like that interested in football these days or that motivated to actually make something. And I think also, since the playoffs just ended, you kind of have to wait till the end to find out who the teams are going to be. So it's hard to make like team branded stuff ahead of time. Because that was kind of what I was saying. Like, how cool would it be if you're a big fan? Well, I don't know who's a Patriots fan around here, but for some Patriots fan to have some Patriots branded whatever for their party, right? That was kind of bespoke made, or it's the Rams, right? The Rams are going, yeah, but it's way too late. I don't have time to be making anything cool, and then turn around and try to sell it on top of that, right? It's just I ain't got no time for that.
Well, there's a whole cottage industry of like that they print things real quick. They have the scores and.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm not part of that.
Right.
And that just is a big chore, right? I mean, I can't imagine. Not something I would personally make a lot of money at or make it worth my effort. But back to naming, I do have that exact same problem at work where we do projects at work that end up with 3 different names. The team that starts it, the sponsor, usually it's some executive sponsor, whatever they call it, and then whatever their underlings that work for it or the name evolves is kind of your understanding of the direction of where things are going. And that gets super frustrating because then it causes a lot of confusion. And then also I see the jokes in the memes online, in particular for artists, of the naming convention of like graphic designer projects, but it could apply to any creative where it's like final version 3, final like, curse word explicit, there's final version of PDF, right, of whatever your design was, which I think also kind of lends to that same goofy naming convention of things.
Well, the classic one in contemporary invention, I think, was the Segway. I don't know if you remember this, but before the Segway was announced, the inventor Dean Kamen was saying, I'm going to release something that is going to change the world, and it was called Ginger. Do you remember that?
I don't remember he called Ginger, but I remember he hyped the heck at it. Yeah, he's going to revolutionize transportation, and then it was like, this is it.
Right, and so like that's a perfect example. You didn't even remember hearing that word. Like he called it the Ginger, and then like the corporate name that stuck was the Segway. So like it doesn't even matter what you want to call something; it's what it ends up sticking.
In terms of naming, I think I can think of contemporary. I mean, I think where it has worked well is like Google and their Android OS, right? Their operating system for Android, where they use the candy names, right? Kit Kat and Oreo and whatever they're up to nowadays. I've lost track. But that was a big deal in the beginning.
Also,
and it seemed like that always stuck.
It's crazy when corporations get sick of their own naming convention. So with the candy thing, that kind of like fits nice. But then with the Xbox, it was like Xbox 2, Xbox 360. And it's like all of a sudden, like they want to scale so large, make it seem like the sexiest thing possible.
Yeah, I remember my son. Gosh, this was 5 years ago. He's like a little kid, and he was like whining about how stupid that was. It went from Xbox 360 to Xbox One or whatever. So
right.
That's what happens, I don't know, marketing folks get involved. Stuff like that happens.
It lives on its own schedule for sure.
All right, so I guess moving on, I guess this week it's my turn to ask you, what's your inspiration topic for this week that you're bringing to us here?
So mine is pretty old school. I'm going to talk about this artist that I really respect called Bartolome Esteban Murrollo. He's a Spanish painter who lived from 1618 to 1682. So have you heard of that guy at all?
Oh, Bartolomeo. We got to figure out how to pronounce his name correctly.
So most people stick with the last name, so Murillo is probably going to be enough.
Murillo.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No, I have not. So what do you like about it? I guess more rather than us about him. What do you like about it? What's inspiring?
So, like, the way I even heard about him is the fact that I would read about Salvador Dali and Picasso, and they would talk about him.
Ah, nice.
So, like, imagine, like, you're familiar with Norman Rockwell, right?
A little bit, yeah.
So, like, that he's a name anyway. That he's the guy who painted those, like, Thanksgiving dinners and whatever. So, I would kind of say that he may have been at a certain time a kind of like the Norman Rockwell of Spain. Like, that it's like the guy that, like, everyone knew about. Like, he was, just an institution,
Oh, okay.
And,
but was he doing, like depictions of daily life the way Norman Rockwell did, or is that...
Exactly. That was, like, a big deal is that... And to think about it, like, Norman Rockwell lived, like, only 80 years ago. But this guy was living right in the era after the High Renaissance, and he was already doing contemporary, like, scenes. Yeah, and so that very thing that made him sort of important, I think, because he was like he was capturing daily life. That makes him important. Like it sort of makes this document of that time. But that same thing caused him to not be as popular as he could have been in his own time.
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense? Because like the big thing was like the big dramatic like altarpieces.
Sure.
And
I guess like royalty and just institutions are funding the work, right? So they're not wanting just everyday depictions of peasants and whatever.
Exactly, and he did do the big commissions too. That's how he paid the bills. But he infused them with like the everyday people, and so. I would put it this way too, that like if you want to learn about something, you look at their work. But another thing that I'm obsessed with is learning about their play. And so what I mean by that is that what people did when they had free creative time, which kind of informs them when they get their actual education. So what this guy would do is he was doing literal market research, which is he would go to the marketplace and as like a kid, and he would draw people. And then he'd have real-time feedback where, like he draws an old lady and someone smiles. He draws a young lady and 3 people stop. Like he would have that instant feedback.
Right. Interesting.
And he, unlike other kind of maybe more stuffy artists who painted their ivory tower, his work has very like sensitive, like specific expressions. Like if you see him today, they could seem contemporary. They could seem like something someone painted today because he was so like attentive to that like everyday, like specificity.
Wow. So I assume you studied this guy quite a bit.
Yeah, like as much as like you can from just like Googling and stuff. Like I haven't been able to, like I never did a research project on him. I never visited him, but he's kind of like a guy I carry the torch for.
Awesome.
And also like that idea, the studying the play thing is something that once I kind of heard about that, it's something I've sort of dug up for other research. So, like a quick kind of little tour of that is like, so Picasso, when he was a kid in Spain, he would do this thing where he would go to the beach with a stick. This is what every kid did, not just him. And you would draw in the wet sand, and then you had to draw so fast before the water crashed over it and washed it away. And so, like, he credits, like, his style of, connecting an eyebrow to, like, the ocular ridge to, like, the tip of the lip in one motion. He contributes that directly to, like, what he was doing as a kid in the sand.
Wow.
And so, like, those kind of connections, like, they're kind of like the story behind the story, which is fun as an artist to kind of uncover.
Yeah, sure. I like that. I'm going to have to pursue that question. That's a really cool question to ask.
Yeah, and I think it's true for all walks of life. Like, I think I've told you this story off air, which was that they asked Air Force pilots who survived their missions, like where did you come up with your moves? And they're like, when I was playing tag, I just stalled and the person ran past me. And so like being able to have creative play really informs like what you can do as an adult, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. I actually thought I had some memories bubble up of thinking about some of the stuff I do around the makerspace and kind of the way I approach when I make things is kind of rooted in some experiences I had as a kid. I guess we'll probably save that for a different episode, but that's a cool. I like that. That's really cool. So I guess one other quick question about Bartolome.
You just call him
right?
Bart. Just call him Bart. That's
Bart.
good.
No, we gotta
Murillo.
Spanish. I just struggle with that one. No. Have you ever seen his work in any museums at all?
Oh, like so I haven't had the opportunity to. He does have stuff all over the world. So he has his work in Russia. He has work obviously in Spain, and then he's like essentially one of the top 10 Spanish painters of all time.
So you think there could ever be like some of his work goes on tour and comes through the U.S.?
That'd be awesome. Yeah, if it did. And from doing research, one of the cool things I saw was that this UK museum, they reproduced a chapel inside the museum because their idea was that like his work was designed to be in a chapel. So just putting it on a white museum wall doesn't really give the right context. Wow. So like they built these like gray like arches that's like similar to the height of where it would have been in a church. Okay. And I guess like that's kind of a good kind of conclusion for him is to talk about how his works were kind of progressive in the sense that he was painting like street urchins and contemporary women. But what's kind of interesting for me, and this is kind of like a ironic twist, like a Twilight Zone kind of thing, is that so in his time his stuff was too contemporary because he was drawing like real people in everyday life. But now people look at his work and they think of it as being too like classic. because like it's been described as like, you know, a chocolate, like the cover of a chocolate bar or something, because it's so like beautiful and so like classic style that it's like he was kind of like screwed on both ends of history.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that's how the pendulum swings, I guess.
But but like, you know, his story and my adoption of him feels like fundamental to the way I started looking at other painters. So that's why it's kind of one of the first ones I kind of want to bring up myself.
Nice. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Sure. Well, so now it's your turn. Last week I talked about my pizza paintings. Do you want to talk about what you've been working on?
Yeah. Yeah, so I usually juggle in multiple projects at the same time, but the one that's I'm kind of obsessed about right now is this, got a couple different names for it as well, but I guess for purposes of this tonight, we'll call it decorative hangboards, right? So these hangboards are these exercise tools for rock climbers to develop your grip strength and your finger strength. So you're literally doing pull-ups for exercise on your fingertips. And you can buy them commercially today. You can find them at rock gyms and outdoor stores. REI sells them. And they're made out of plastic, and they're kind of very boring to me. I'm not a very hardcore rock climber. I'm not very dedicated. So I don't like doing pull-ups in general, even though I rock climb. So, you know, when we got the CNC cutting machines at the Makerspace, which is automatic computer-controlled carving, I got this wild idea to say, hey, I don't want to make a very regimented hangboard that's just got these rectangles in it. When I climb on real rocks, there's a lot of variation, right? None of the holds are even. Sometimes you're pulling at an angle. Actually, one of the things I think about when I climb a lot is knowing what angle to pull. Sometimes you're pulling sideways to not fall down, which is kind of counterintuitive for a lot of people. So I was like, I could start carving these weird shapes, right? So I did one that was very kind of had these weird organic shapes, and brought it home, set it up at home, and as I stood back and looked at it, without just randomly, some of the shapes, the center of it kind of looks like it has a skull in it. And it kind of was like decorative, like a Mexican sugar skull, which that just got all the creative juices flowing of like, wow, I can make any kind of design I want, right? So I sat on that idea for about a year, and then finally this year, I kind of got comfortable with the machine that does the cutting and explored some other shapes. And it's kind of funny, even a little bit ties into what you're describing with the Spanish artist, Bartolome, is I got a little bit too creative with it. So my next idea, I was like, hey, there's these C-130 cargo planes that go over the makerspace all day long. They're really impressive to me. And it's a giant wing. So what if I did one that was like you're doing pull-ups off of this plane? Like that would be really cool. So I did that one, and it didn't actually come out looking as good as I had it in my head. So a lot of people were like, what the heck is this cargo plane that you made over here, right? But it did prove kind of the idea that I could carve these shapes. So then I decided to make one that my friend Brian, he's Hawaiian, he's rock climber. And I was like, let me do a Hawaiian theme once. I kind of did this like Hang 10 thing with a map of the islands and these waves, and it was really cool looking and very decorative. And then I was going to paint it, and my daughter actually ended up painting it. So she really embellished it with a lot of, I don't know if it's depth or there's like blending of the ocean colors. And I just gave it to Brian last night, and he was like, wow, this is really cool. But you could also sort of see this like confusion in his face of like, what is this? Like, is this art? Like, you want me to climb on this? Like, this is not. It was a little bit of the same feedback I got from my son, was like, I think you need to make them so they look more like hangboards. And I'm like, no, that's not the point, right? The whole point is that it's something you can hang up even when you're not using it. It looks cool on your wall. But seeing Brian's reaction a little bit, I was like, okay, maybe I am going to have to kind of ease into this a little bit. So that's all sort of feedback I'm getting real time. Conversely, even going with some simpler shapes, I think they have the potential to be fairly popular. At least I have this fantasy that they'll be popular and I can actually sell them. So that also got me thinking about like, okay, this is outdoor recreational equipment. It's all, a lot of it, that component is branding, right? And people want the brand name. So I got caught up in thinking of like, okay, should I try to register a brand name before I roll this out, or, try to protect it somehow? And that was a little bit of a black hole of looking into the trademarking process. And I've kind of come full circle now where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to develop a brand, which actually you helped me with this weekend, right? I was at least come up with a little logo. I'm not going to worry about doing any kind of actual formal trademarking yet, but at least I'll have something that's cohesive that I can stand behind. And I'm trying to make a design now that I guess is going to be a little bit of a middle ground where it's a little bit decorative, but a little more traditional, that I'd like to get out for a local rock climbing competition that's coming up in February here in Atlanta. So it's called Float the Boat Rock Climbing Bouldering Competition. And I'd like to donate it to the organizers of that, the Southeast Climbers Coalition, and see if they can raffle it off. And whoever the winner is, I can also get some feedback on like, what do you guys think about this? And does this have potential, right? And I anticipate that based on that event, there's an after party after the competition, so hopefully it'll get some exposure, that there'll be people there that are interested in asking where they could get one, and they could at least have something behind I could point them to, right? A little bit of a web page. Started the Instagram account for that as well. I'm starting to post some content to that. So that's all pretty obsessed with that. I could probably talk about it for a while, but it's all very raw, very organic, very like fluid in my thinking and where I'm going with it. But I hope it has some potential to make a little bit of money, and it really brings in two things that I really enjoy doing, bring a lot of, enjoyment into my life, which is making stuff. This thing's carved out of wood at the makerspace, and rock climbing as well. So it's like this very nice synergy to bring the passions together, right? Which has got me really motivated.
So, would you feel comfortable fielding like a couple questions about it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I felt like I rambled on there a little too long. You may want to cut some of that description out.
No, I'd like to be like the advocate for the masses. Like, okay. So like, for instance, let's unpack that that experience of you delivering one for the first time. So did you, I imagine, some ideas of troubleshooting that flash in your head? Were you thinking like, oh, I should hang on one myself and shoot a little video, or I should shoot my son hanging on one to kind of demonstrate how you would hang it up in a room and how it would work? Or is that something that you're not ready for yet? Or
No, yeah, no, I definitely think that I need to do that for sure. I also I did this for Brian. It was a surprise. So I've been working on it since I think I started working on it around Christmas or the Christmas break. And I really try to keep the whole thing under wraps. So sometimes I feel like I even overshare a little bit on Instagram or social media. But this is one that I was really biting my lip. Nope, not going to share any pictures. I don't want Brian to find out about this. I want it to be a surprise. And it was a surprise, right? Where I think he didn't even know what to expect. I was like, hey, I need to meet up with you. I got something I want to give you. But he had no idea what I was bringing. I think also maybe if I had told him hey, I'm working on this cool hangboard design and kind of primed him a little bit to it, it may have been a bit of a reaction, but it was very much a cold surprise. And it's not like we're the kind of friends that give each other gifts a lot. I think this is probably the first thing I've ever given him, right? So we're not super good friends. We're just friends. And I think it was sort of whoa, what is all this, right? Where are you coming from with this? But I got that idea to do Hawaii, right? When I was just trying to think of different themes, the Hawaiian Islands the thing's kind of got a weird aspect ratio, right? Where I'm doing it at a board that's 30 inches wide, but only 10 inches tall. So it kind of looks like a sign almost. And it's designed to hang over a doorway. So, and it taps into, I actually read this when I was doing a little bit of research on hangboards and whatnot, some of the other manufacturers, and climbing magazine, rock climbing magazine, one of the magazines out there, somebody wrote, there's a period in every climber's life where you're kind of going through, you're just sizing everything up that you encounter. I could climb that, right? Could I climb that? I think I could climb that. It's a brick wall. It's the overpass on the freeway while you're stuck in traffic. Just whatever, right? Any tree that you see. And I've definitely gone through that in my life in the past. And this sort of taps into that where, I've done pull-ups off of the trim around a doorway, right? That little half inch. And even Brett was telling me, and Brett is not a physical guy or active guy, his daughter's roommate broke. He had to go in and fix the doorway that the roommate had broke trying to do pull-ups off of the door, right? So it's a pretty common thing, I think, for rock climbers, right? To sort of go through that. And this is kind of tapping into that. So I think they'll sort of get it once they put their hands on it, but just seeing it or just seeing a photo, it may need a little more.
Well, let's give you more credit than even saying rock climbers. I think that's universal to kids. Even
to kids, yes,
yeah, just everyone wants to climb on stuff, and you'll have that market as well. But yeah, and then so you've made some prototypes. You've actually presented one. It's funny. It's almost like imagining in a pretentious way, Thomas Edison handing someone a light bulb and then being like, "Oh, thank you." They have no context for it.
Yeah, it was really the thing that really struck me. I don't know if Brian's ever going to listen to this recording, but he's Hawaiian. The whole thing's got a Hawaiian hang 10 theme to it, and Brian climbs. He's a really good climber. His daughter climbs. So I really want them to climb on it and let me know what they think. I even said, hey, let me know if you think the paint is too slick or has enough texture, right, grip to it. And he's like, yeah, okay, whatever. He sort of gave me some feedback on how to make it rougher for more grip. But he's like, I got some friends that climb in Hawaii, and I guess there's a little niche community in Hawaii that rock climbs. He's like, I'll talk to them and see what they think about it. And my reaction, I didn't tell him this, I'll say this now, I was like, I don't really care what your friends in Hawaii are going to say to a picture. It looks pretty. I know it looks pretty. Yeah. You're not going to be able to climb it or touch it, right? Any feedback they give me, other than maybe they could just be why are you, what's that word when you, gosh, I'm drawing a blank now. Misappropriate somebody's culture. What are you in Atlanta? What the heck? Just on the hype end of Hawaii. And I don't really intend to sell the Hawaiian version. That one's very much a custom gift or if I do, it's going to be much simpler and less decorative than what I made for Brian. But Brian being a good friend, and we had a really good collaboration with my daughter. It just turned into a lot of fun, and we kind of went overboard, right? Like, I don't think you could ever sell what we made for him for any kind of profit. It just was too many hours sunk into it. But as a gift, it's kind of cool to do.
Well,
definitely.
I think the word you're looking for is cultural appropriation.
Yeah, or misappropriation. I think is the word I was. Yeah, cultural. Yeah.
But I was going to say that that's an interesting aspect of being a maker right now, and for you in particular, which is that the old method was like, step one, let me just make something that you can hang on, and you would first just do something utilitarian. But you almost like skipped a step where you're like, well, we don't, like, the whole point is not for it to just function. I want it to be personalized. Are you still dealing with that? Are you still toying with like how personalized they could be, or is it like this just sort of like I'll try 10 different things and see how I feel about them?
No, yeah, I am still juggling with that idea. I do think they need to be personalized on some level. That's the whole point, because you can already, and it wasn't that I skipped the utilitarian part, it's that that's already available on the market by like multiple different brands and manufacturers that have already driven the cost down to something that they can manufacture for a profit. But I don't think anybody's getting rich, even like the big climbing companies out there and REI, like they're not getting rich selling hangboards, right? Like this is just one more product, within a catalog of products that are out there. So it's got to be personalized. And I guess what I am thinking about is, rather than waiting for somebody to request a custom order of like whatever they want, at a minimum I could start making them based on themes around certain cities or certain climbing locations. I mean, we're already bouncing an idea with a friend of mine who is a climber off of something themed around like Yosemite National Park and El Capitan. Those are like climbing meccas, right? Probably one for Boulder, Colorado, because Boulder is like a climbing mecca. But before I go expanding that out, I was going to stick to some in the Southeast that I'm personally familiar with, that I can kind of have a little bit of a network of local people. But I'm also, one of the challenges I'm finding is this thing, like, I'm just seeing so many ideas, like overwhelming number of ideas, like, oh, I could do this, I could do Yosemite, I could do Alaska, I could do, like cityscapes. I started doing it in Atlanta. I started drawing one for like an Atlanta skyline for like local folks, but then you're like, oh, if you're going to do skylines, I got to do New York City. Like, no, there isn't climbing in New York City, but there's climbers there, right? And that might look kind of cool hanging up in your living room or your hallway or something. So, it's almost like overwhelming, like, okay, what do I actually want to do next, right? So having this local competition to float the boat in Atlanta, like that at least grounds me. It's like, okay, I got to get something for that, because that's coming up February 23rd, and I need to have it done. And the organizers of that event, I haven't reached out to them yet, so I got to talk to them and get them to accept it, so I'm not just like crashing their party with like, hey, I brought this, what do you guys, in the middle of the chaos of trying to run an event. But after that, that's kind of what I'm thinking about, all that. Definitely some level of personalization.
Has any part of it started congealing for you in terms of like, oh, I've done a couple now, so now I kind of know what I like to make and what's easier to make? So like, for instance, like if an investor came and was like, this is amazing, I'm going to give you $100,000, but I want you to focus on just for kids, or I want you to make them all the same size and you can just put different decorations on them, or like if someone came in, like, would you be able to say, no, this part's important to me, or that, like, or is it all kind of up for grabs at this point?
I think it's all generally up for grabs. I think what I've been thinking about is more on like the engineering standpoint of like cutting the time out, because the time is what's the killer thing in terms of cost. And like the first one I made, I cut it on a slow machine. I was learning how to use the machine, but it literally took like 4 hours or more for this machine to get through all the cutting. And it wasn't the kind of thing you could walk away from. You had to babysit it on some level. I mean, I could walk to the other side of the room, but you had to be listening in case something went wrong. So that's pretty brutal. So it's got to be something that I think the most recent one that I'm working on for this competition was like, oh, I can get this thing where the cutting operation is within 30 minutes. Like that's manageable, right? Because it's not 30 minutes of cut time, plus you got to set it up, and then you got to do the sanding. There's a lot of other operations besides the cutting. Same thing with the Hawaiian theme that I did. I made I designed it, at midnight over a couple of nights, like in the flow, juices flowing. It's all on the computer. There's no physical constraints, right? So I got these like what I think are pretty cool little decorative wave forms to the waves of the ocean that look cool, and it's hard to tell how well you're going to be able to climb on them or not, or hang on them. But they were brutal. Like the cut time increased exponentially because now I've got, these swoopy shapes. And then trying to sand those and clean them up was pretty painful, right? And time consuming. Where I was like, oh, I think next time it's just going to be more simplified, stylized, wavy lines, right? Like you might just find just a regular old wavy line with very minimum variation and kind of focus on a little less decorative and a little bit easier to just do a pull up off of it. And it still evokes the sense of like, yeah, those are ocean waves. So that kind of more technical like feasibility is where I'm caught up. I also haven't figured out what kind of wood to settle on. There's a lot of opinions, a lot of variation. I've started with like what's wood that I can buy at Lowe's, which is the first piece I made out of was pine, just like the cheapest thing I could find. Actually, no, the very first one I made out of was out of 2 pieces of scrap 2x4, which is like literally like out of the junk bin. And that was kind of cool. I think that was a good start. Then I found this pine board that was bigger, so I didn't have to glue pieces together. But it's like really heavy, surprisingly. And then just this past weekend, I haven't cut them yet, but I bought some cedar, which looked a lot nicer and like has potential. Like cedar is like more like rot resistant and stuff. But when I cut them down, they were surprisingly light. Like they're almost so light where I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how these are going to hold up, especially if some like hardcore, like knuckle dragging boulder guy that's like super tough and it's going to really be hanging on these all day long. Like, are they going to hold up to people, or are they going to be more for like the casual user, like out of that particular grade of cedar? And I'm not really a woodworker carpenter, so I don't really know a lot about wood or what's the ideal wood to be using for this. And it's not just ideal for like hanging on, but it's like for cutting, right? And the availability and how scarce it is, and is it like a renewable type of wood? Or I definitely don't want to be using stuff that's like coming from rainforest. That would be totally against like my aesthetic of like kind of defeats the purpose, right? Clear cutting rainforest hardwoods for essentially a toy.
Well, let me ask you this, because I remember from talking to you, this was kind of like a practical thing, was that, so you have this kind of set deadline that you want to be ready for this climb in February, this convention. So, like, to unpack that the way we talked about it before, so do you have a plan in mind of, like, how many you want to be able to bring, or that, like, that you'll be able to go to market? Like, if someone wanted to buy one, what would you say to them?
Yeah, so it's actually a competition. It's not a convention. So I am going to be super happy if I could have 2 ready for that. One to give away that'll essentially be raffled as a fundraiser, and then one if somebody wanted to buy one. And then beyond that, I'm thinking if it was really just testing the market, because I don't want to invest in having a bunch of these that I end up having to give away to friends, right? Like, you couldn't sell these, so here you go, dude. Do whatever you want with this. Invest too much time and effort. So I'm planning to, if I do get some orders in, what I haven't figured out is like, what's the cycle time going to be, right? Like, hey, I'll have this done for you in 2 weeks, or I'll have it done for you in 4 weeks. I've even told the idea of 6 weeks feels like too long. Like, why are you going to pay money for something you're not going to get for 6 weeks? But definitely take them on like a little bit of a pre-order, and then start to then refine of like, okay, what do I actually want to try to sell, and then do something where you're actually building up some level of stock, right? And that's going to be a little bit also like trying to play on like anticipating what might be popular, what people might be interested in buying. And I envision these people are going to be buying these primarily like it's like a gift item, right? You're either going to splurge for yourself, but rock climbers don't tend to have a lot of money, and the money they have like isn't spent on. I don't imagine they'd spend a lot of money on something like this. You spend it on like going on trips or actual gear you're going to use like while you're climbing outdoors. So we'll see. It's kind of like a niche kind of gift kind of thing, right? Around the holidays or birthdays or whatever.
Well, let me ask you this. You have a kind of a coming out party in terms of like this will be the first time the public gets to see your work at the climbing event. Are you doing like any play testing either yourself or you think you might ask some buddies like, hey, you want to hang on my board for an afternoon and give me some feedback?
Well, that's what I'm hoping Brian will do. So I'm going to start pestering Brian next week and go, hey, you had it for a week now. You set it up. What are you doing with it? Right? Let me know. I was like, tell me everything. I really want to know, like, what sucks. Like, tell me what sucks about this is what I really want to know. I've got my son play testing. So we've got a couple up in the house. And I was actually really shocked when he didn't like the one I did with the airplane motif. Although I hung it up next to his PlayStation now and he's hanging on it, even though he doesn't like it. He's telling me like what he doesn't like about it, which is actually very valuable feedback. But he's still hanging on it because again, there's something natural. It's there. It's designed to be hung on. So there you go. But then he said he liked the sugar, the one that I'm now calling the sugar skull motif, which was surprising to me because I thought that one's really kind of far out there. So I want to refine that design and actually turn it into something that resembles like properly a sugar skull, not. Today it's like coincidence that it looks that way, and I suspect there's some people who look at it would not connect that to a sugar skull. It's just something that I see. So we'll see. But so I'm starting to get a little bit of that feedback, and actually what I want to do is to whoever wins the raffle prize, I want to hit them up. I'm actually thinking of, okay, I want to have a little piece of paper that goes with it, like an instruction manual, and in that like have a little paragraph of like, this is a prototype. Please like send me feedback of like what you think about this and what in particular, like I want to really know like what sucks about it, right? Because that way I can be like, okay, either something sucks about it, that there's something I can do about it, right? I have like a line of sight or a vision of like, okay, if we made these minor things that would address this concern, or they may say something like that's sort of not something I can deal with, and then that's useful feedback to know like, okay, we either need this idea doesn't have legs, right? Or it needs something totally different that I may or may not be interested in pursuing. And also hearing just people think like, yeah, it's cool to see it on my wall or whatever, right? It is decorative because that's the intent is it's like a decorative thing that if no one's climbing on it and you had a guest, they might just think it's a piece of art on your wall, decoration, sculpture thing, not necessarily something you're cranking pull-ups on because trying to develop your forearm strength.
which I would see as a goal that a wife who doesn't climb sees her husband bring us home and says like, oh, that would be cool to hang, like that it could exist on that level.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so the ones that I've got up right now, and I didn't come up with this idea. I've seen like people do this. Like there's those temporary pull-up bars that you can buy that you wedge into your doorway and you can do pull-ups, right? Like P90X or whatever. So people figured out like how to attach a hangboard to it. So you sort of put it up and take it down. So that blocks your doorway, right? You're not going to leave it up all day long, or most people aren't. I'm sure there's people that have a room where they just leave it set up in general. Or they have them like in their garage or their basement, right? It's not some normal hangboard. I mean, I guess if you're kind of young and living with roommates or whatever, you might just put it up permanently over your door. But I think as you get older or people that are interested in their house furnishings matching and the color of their walls and all that, like this would be something that might blend in a little better. And then you're not tearing up your doorway either, right? The frame around your doorway. I forget what that's called, right? It's got that trim around the door jamb. Because I've definitely done pull-ups off of the door jamb where it's literally, I haven't broken it, but it'll start peeling off of the wall, right? Where like the hardware, the nails that are holding it in place have gotten loose. You're like, oh, can't do that anymore unless we plan on replacing this whole thing.
This might not be particularly useful feedback, but just my own thought of like, what is the minimum you could do for the maximum chance of success? And that aspect of like saying like making them for kids because like it's for a kid, so if it's weird, that's fine. And that like it's weird. The kids have weird stuff in their rooms, and
sure.
And also like kids have less weight, so there's going to be less chance of it like being destroyed. Like the catastrophic failure goes way down because their weight's way down. So like that's my first reaction.
guess the one thing for a kid is like, I'm not sure how we'd hang it up for a kid, because like for an adult, you put it in over the doorway and you can reach it, right? But a kid's got to be closer to the ground, and you can't just put it directly on the wall because you need that space for your legs, right? And your body kind of swings back and forth as you're climbing on this thing. So they might have to come up with some kind of little stand or contraption for that thing to be mounted, or some kind of mounting system that puts it away from the wall. Some kind of frame, like almost like they sell those racks that goes in a closet, right? Like a hanger rod. So that pushes it away from the wall, but instead of it being for a closet hanger, it'd be for hanging this thing on it for kids to monkey on. I don't know. That's a good idea. I have to explore that one a little bit, and I'm sure there's some like yuppie climber parents out there that would spend a lot of money on their kids for stuff like this in the kind of the youth climbing community. I don't know. I was always one of these parents that hated spending money on my kids. Expensive, like rock climbing shoes or whatever, right? They're like, dude, they're going to throw them so quick. Yeah, but we'll see.
Well, just to like put it in context for people who don't know you, like you're doing all this and you're not even you don't even consider yourself a climber per se. Where does this rank amongst like projects you've had? Like, is this one that you're like the biggest amount of business potential you've ever had, or like have you had other projects like this where you've thought of maybe selling things?
Oh yeah, definitely. This falls right up in there. It's just like the next flavor of the month kind of thing. But this is the first one that I think does a really good brings like a synergy of these like two things that I'm very interested in and already do in my daily life. So I would definitely consider myself a climber. I just don't consider myself a hardcore climber, right, on that spectrum. But I've been climbing since I was in high school, which is now getting on pretty long time. 15 years, right? But kind of plateaued, right, where climbing gets really hard at some level and you got to really train to improve past that. And I've just sort of plateaued where I'm just like, I'm not interested in putting that much effort into it. Usually you got to go on trips to go climbing outdoors. It's not something you just go readily do. Climbing in a gym is kind of cool. I like it. I go 2-3 times a week a lot of times, but it's not the same as climbing outdoors. But it's a big commitment to get outdoors, right? Especially as you're getting older with other responsibilities in my life. But this one, again, I enjoy climbing a lot. I've thought about buying hangboards in the past at home, but again, I'm like, I don't think I'm going to use it that much. And then it's like setting it up. It's not something I want to set up permanently. And I don't, and this sort of clicked where it's like, oh, now we can make something that actually looks cool. I might maybe even be inclined to hang on it more and actually use it because I'll have it out more readily available. And I have over the last year or so, as I've kind of toyed with like, hey, I would really like, if this thing becomes viable, like it would be a little bit of a dream where it's like, how can you find the things you're interested in to make money in? It's like, if I could somehow marry rock climbing and making together and do that full time, that seems like a huge win. Certainly turn into a grind like anything, right? So we'll see. But right now, sitting on the outside of that, where I sort of have a desk job for a large corporation, right, kind of mid-career, this seems really appealing and like really energizing because it's bringing both things in. And I've thought about, I think even we've discussed this, you and I have discussed this a little bit, that Nikola Tesla wireless cell phone charger thing that I made for DragonCon a couple years ago. I mean, that one was one I've thought about, like, oh, this would be really cool to make this and sell it. And I think that has potential to sell, especially as a gift. But that one, it's like just the maker side of things, and not all cell phones. Again, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with, like, not all cell phones have the receiver, and it's electronics, and you got to deal with warranties and whatever, all that stuff. People have expectations about electronics that I never really felt compelled to actually pursue it in a meaningful way. Where this one marries, again, it kind of marries into this sports equipment thing that I feel like has a lot of potential, and it's bringing both together.
Well, if you just listen to the numbers you said on this show, I would say getting it down to a cut time of 30 minutes, presuming you could decorate them like in an hour or something around that time, and then let's say it probably takes no more than 30 minutes once you find your tools to install it in a house. Like, that seems like those are doable numbers, like just from that standpoint.
Yeah, I'm thinking, let's say total manufacturing time, right? Like 4 hours worth of effort. You could probably do some in batch. So today, right now, it's just one at a time, 4 hours. If you could make a couple kind of within that 4 hour time frame, where you're sort of able to have a little bit of a flow, where like today we're going to do an hour's worth of operations, and then I think it has potential. And I think also there's some of the existing manufacturers, if this thing has the potential that I think it does, it's going to be pretty easy for them to copy or do their own version. And I'm not quite sure how I feel about that, but I think in general, I think that'd be a good thing, right? It's good to see what other people are doing. It's part of like a vibrant market, right? And if anything, it just means it is viable, has some kind of market appeal to it. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, definitely good luck with that project, and I want to hear about its progress.
Sure. Yeah, I'll have a lot to talk about over the coming month. Cool. So, I got the timer running. We've definitely been talking for quite a while, so I don't know. Do you think we should go ahead and wrap up?
Yeah.
Talked about my car last week, which I haven't done anything with. So what about you? Anything you fixed in the last week?
Yeah, so a little bit of a meta story here, which is that I'm constantly working on improving the recording process. So you're privy to this, of course, but to just share that, it's like I'm onto a different computer now, and I changed the speaker for a third time, and I'm also doing recording in duplicate. So it's hopefully that we'll be able to see those dividends in the record process. But it's just to share with you because you wear many different hats, but I'm a visual artist, and so this is sort of a kind of hobby for me, is having to edit and know about recording in general. Yeah,
really.
It's a whole process.
The sound, that's a good one. Yeah, because I got to say, the last episode, when I went back and listened to it, in the beginning, it literally sounded like you're in the shower for a couple minutes, right? With the amount of static noise.
Yeah.
Static noise. Whoa. But it cleaned up as I listened to it. So we'll definitely appreciate you putting some effort into chasing that problem.
Yeah. Well,
all right.
That'll wrap it up.
Talk to you later.
Find more information at doubleprimer.com.